Peter, a single parent, adopts twin girls who have been rejected by 13 other families. But when he sees their birth certificate, the stunning truth leaves him speechless. What hidden facts will Peter discover about the twins' intriguing history, and how will they alter all he thought he knew? Before we begin, please leave a comment below indicating where in the world you are watching from today. And if you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe. Peter looked at the window of his vacant house, his gaze drawn to the swing set in the backyard. The shackles creaked quietly in the breeze, a chilling reminder of long-forgotten laughter. He closed his eyes as memories of his daughter Tasha rushed back. "Daddy, push me higher," her voice rang through his memory. Peter's chest clenched, and the old pang of loss squeezed his heart. It had been 3 years since Tasha's death in an accident, yet the sadness still felt fresh. He opened his eyes and blinked away tears. The house was too quiet now. Every room contained memories of Tasha, her toys carefully organized on shelves, her beloved stuffed bear sitting on her bed. Peter couldn't force himself to make any changes, as if conserving her room would keep her close. He strolled into the kitchen, his footsteps booming through the solitude. Tasha's artwork remained on the refrigerator, held up by bright magnets. Peter traced his finger over a crayon stick figure labeled, "Daddy." His throat clenched. "I miss you so much, sweetheart," he whispered. Peter poured himself a cup of coffee, but the aroma did little to improve his mood. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the dark liquid. The emptiness of his life was overpowering. Every day was a struggle to find meaning, to continue without his little girl's smile to brighten his world. He had recently begun to consider adoption. The concept horrified and interested him. Could he open his heart to another child? Is it fair to that child to know that he may never love them as much as he loved Tasha? Peter's hands trembled slightly as he raised the coffee cup to his lips. The thought of loving another child felt like a betrayal of Tasha's memories. However, the loneliness of his empty house had become terrible. "What do you think, Tasha?" he inquired aloud, his voice barely audible. "Do you want Daddy to be happy again?" Peter cried as he struggled with his conflicted emotions. The urge to care and love a kid again clashed with his fear of replacing Tasha or, worse, failing another child due to his own mental traumas. Peter's hands trembled as he drove into the parking lot of Sunnyvale Adoption Agency. He took a long breath, attempting to slow his beating heart. He reminded himself that this was only a visit, to acquire information. As he walked through the glass doors, the bright decor and children's artwork on the walls made his chest constrict. It reminded him very much of Tasha's preschool. Peter gulped hard before approaching the receptionist. "I have an appointment with Miss Thompson," he explained quietly. A few minutes later, a pleasant-looking woman with graying hair greeted him. "Mr. Hello, Parker. My name is Lisa Thompson. Please come inside." Peter followed her into a nice office and sat in a comfy chair. Miss Thompson smiled warmly. "So, are you interested in adoption?" Peter nodded, his words barely audible. "I lost my daughter several years ago. I believe I'm ready to open my heart again." Miss Thompson's eyes softened with comprehension. "I'm really sad for your loss. It takes tremendous fortitude to consider adoption after such a catastrophe." Peter's tension eased as they talked. Miss Thompson's pleasant demeanor put him at ease. She explained the adoption process and gently answered his questions. Then she paused for a bit. "Mr. Parker, I'd like to discuss a particular case with you. We have twin baby girls, Sandra and Sophie, who need a home." Peter felt his heart skip a beat. Twins. He had not considered that possibility. Miss Thompson proceeded, her voice quiet. "These small ones have had a tough beginning. They've already been rejected by 13 households." Peter's eyebrows rose in surprise. 13? But why? Miss Thompson explained that the girls have certain emotional challenges. As a result of their past experiences, they require extra patience and care. Many families were unprepared for the commitment. Peter felt a range of emotions sweep over him. His heart broke for these tiny kids who had already experienced so much rejection. But uncertainty crept in as well. Was he prepared for such a challenge? Could he offer the love and stability these twins required? Would you like to learn more about Sandra and Sophie? Miss Thompson asked kindly. Peter hesitated, his mind racing with competing ideas. A part of him wanted to say yes right now, but another half was hesitant, fearful of the unknown. He hesitantly followed Miss Thompson down the corridor to the nursery. His heart raced as they neared the room where Sandra and Sophie were waiting. He took a deep breath, attempting to stabilize himself as they entered. Peter's gaze rested on two little cribs side by side. They included two adorable newborn girls who were only 6 months old. They seemed so little and defenseless. Peter felt a lump forming in his throat. "This is Sandra," Miss Thompson whispered softly, nodding toward the baby on the left. "And this is Sophie." Peter took a step closer, his eyes soaking in every detail. Sandra slept peacefully, her wide brown eyes watching him with curiosity. Sophie, on the other hand, wiggled and cooed, extending her chubby palms. "Would you like to hold one of these?" Miss Thompson inquired. Peter simply nodded, unable to respond. She tenderly brought Sandra into Peter's arms. The weight of the little baby seemed both familiar and unfamiliar. Sandra stared up at him, wide-eyed and trusting. Peter felt a flood of emotion rush over him. It was a feeling he had not had since Tasha. His chest squeezed, and tears stung his eyes. He blinked them away, not wanting to startle the infant. "Hi there, Sandra," he said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "It's nice to meet you." Sandra stretched up, her small fingers resting on Peter's cheek. The little gesture almost undid him. He looked across at Sophie, who was now sitting up in her crib and watching closely. Miss Thompson grinned. "They seem to like you, Mr. Parker." Peter couldn't deny the attraction he felt for these girls. Regardless of his anxieties and uncertainties, something about them moved him. He gently rocked Sandra, amazed by how natural it felt. "Would you like to hold Sophie too?" Miss Thompson inquired. Peter nodded, gently returning Sandra as he cradled Sophie. He noted distinctions between the twins. Sophie, in contrast to Sandra, was more lively, kicking her little legs frantically. As Peter stood there holding Sophie and looking at Sandra, he felt a slew of emotions racing inside him: joy, fear, hope, and despair, all competing for control. These newborns required love, stability, and patience, which he wasn't sure he could deliver. He couldn't deny the connection he felt. As Peter reluctantly returned Sophie to Miss Thompson, the social worker's countenance turned serious. She motioned for him to have a seat in the small office next to the nursery. "Mr. Parker, there's something you should know about Sandra and Sophie," Miss Thompson said, her voice kind but forceful. "Their start in life hasn't been easy." Peter's heart fell. He knew there had to be a reason why so many families had abandoned the twins. But hearing it verified made his chest constrict. Miss Thompson continued, "They spent their first few months in a chaotic environment, and both of their parents died in a serious accident." She paused, allowing the facts to sink in. "They may face developmental challenges and will need extra care and patience." Peter sat in startled stillness, his thoughts racing. He recalled the adorable newborns he'd just hugged, attempting to reconcile their innocent faces with the cruel reality of their birth. Peter acknowledged, "I'm not sure if I can handle that," his voice barely above a whisper. The weight of responsibility was overpowering. Miss Thompson nodded compassionately. "There's a lot to consider, Mr. Parker. Take some time to think about it." Peter departed from the adoption agency with a broken heart. As he drove home, thoughts of his daughter Tasha filled his head. He remembered her as a newborn, little and exquisite in his arms. He had fallen in love with her instantly and completely. Peter arrived home and found himself in Tasha's former room. He had not altered a thing since she died. Sitting on her little bed, he picked up a plush bunny she had adored. Tears flowed freely as he remembered reading bedtime stories to Tasha and hearing her laughter fill the room. He recalled the many nights he'd spent rocking her to sleep, singing softly as she dozed off. The memories of her first steps, words, and all the milestones they'd shared came flooding back. Peter's heart ached from the depth of his feelings for Tasha and the sorrow of losing her. Could he ever love another child in this way? And if he could, was he strong enough to help Sandra and Sophie get through their rocky start? Peter wrestled with his emotions throughout the evening. The prospect of opening his heart again worried him, but he couldn't get away from the sight of those two small children in desperate need of love and stability. Peter spent the next several days in intense thought. The calm in his house, which had once been a source of comfort, now felt suffocating. He found himself continuously thinking about Sandra and Sophie, their small features imprinted on his mind. Peter was sitting at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, when his attention fell on a family portrait. It portrayed him, his late wife, and Tasha in the park, all smiling and laughing. An understanding came over him. The love he had felt with Tasha was not meant to be hidden away. It was a gift that could develop and be shared with others in need. With shaky palms, Peter phoned the adoption agency's number. "Miss Thompson, this is Peter Parker. I'd prefer to proceed with adopting Sandra and Sophie." The following several weeks were a blur of activity. Peter immersed himself in the adoption process, filling out tons of paperwork and attending parenting workshops. Each stage brought a mix of joy and concern, but he persisted, motivated by the prospect of giving the twins a loving home. As he readied the nursery, Peter found himself conversing with Tasha's memory. "I hope you understand, sweetheart," he muttered, as he put together a cot. "I am not replacing you. I'm simply expanding our family." The day before he was supposed to bring the girls home, Peter stood in the newly designed nursery, which had soft pink walls, 2 white cribs, and a rocking chair in the corner. It was perfect. He stroked his fingers over a stuffed bunny, similar to Tasha's favorite, which was waiting for new owners. Peter's heart beat with excitement and a hint of anxiety. Was he really prepared for this? Could he be the parent that these girls needed? As hesitation set in, he closed his eyes and took a long breath. He thought about Sandra and Sophie, their terrible beginnings in life, and the love he had to offer. "We'll figure it out together," he replied quietly, a faint smile spreading over his lips. "It won't be easy, but we'll make it work." After a few days, Peter's hands trembled as he opened the front door and carefully balanced the car seats that held Sandra and Sophie. The twins, only 6 months old, blinked sleepily as he brought them inside their new home. "Well, girls," he replied quietly, "this is it. Welcome home." He placed the car seats in the living room and carefully unbuckled the babies. Sandra yawned, wiping her tiny fist against her eyes, while Sophie peered around with wide, interested eyes. Peter's heart flooded with love and dread as he clutched them both. The initial several hours went smoothly. The girls appeared content, cooing quietly as Peter guided them about the house. He fed them their bottles, changed their diapers, and felt a sense of success after each duty. But as darkness fell, everything changed. Sophie whimpered first, then Sandra let out a full-throated howl. Peter ran inside the nursery, his mind racing. "What is wrong? Are you hungry? Wet?" He checked their diapers, gave them bottles, and rocked them softly. Nothing appeared to help. The crying became louder and more urgent. Peter felt a knot building in his stomach as the minutes passed by. "Shh, it's okay," he said, softly bouncing them. "You are safe here. I got you." However, the twins continued to wail, their small faces flushed with exertion. Peter paced the nursery, the living room, and back again. The house, which had been so silent for so long, now resonated with cries of distress. As the clock struck midnight, Peter felt the first signs of genuine panic. He knew it would be difficult, but this seemed impossible. The girls were inconsolable, and he felt completely powerless. What I doing wrong? He whispered, his voice cracking. Maybe, perhaps I'm not made out for this after all. Doubt crept in, icy and persistent. Had he made a horrible mistake? These ladies required someone strong, someone who understood what they were. Doing not a broken man who was still grieving his own loss. Peter fell into the rocking chair, holding the wailing babies close to his bosom. Tears welled up in his eyes as he gazed down at Sandra and Sophie's upset expression. I'm sorry, he muttered. I'm very sorry. I'm not sure if I can do this. As morning came, Peter finally got the twins to sleep. He collapsed into the couch, raking a hand over his unkempt hair. The night had been long and difficult, but a glimmer of hope remained in his heart. They had gotten through their first night together. Later that morning, when the girls were asleep quietly, Peter decided to organize their stuff. He opened the box the adoption agency had given him, which contained the twins' limited items and vital documents. As he went through the stuff, his fingers brushed upon two official-looking documents. Peter pulled them out and saw they were Sandra and Sophie's birth certificates. His eyes examined the documents, taking in each detail. He suddenly froze, his breath stopping in his throat. The date and hospital name were exactly the same as his daughter's. Peter's hands trembled as he looked at the certificates. Sandra and Sophie were born on the same day, in the same hospital, but in separate years than his deceased daughter. The coincidence seems too remarkable to be true. How is this possible? He mumbled, barely audible. A flood of emotion swept over him. Peter felt dizzy and overwhelmed by the consequences. Could this be more than chance? Is it possible that these girls were brought into his life by a higher power? He looked across to the nursery, where Sandra and Sophie were sleeping. His heart pounded. The problems of the night before appeared less intimidating. In their stead, a sense of purpose started to emerge. Maybe, Peter muttered, maybe it was meant to be. He traced the date on the birth certificates with his finger, remembering how happy he had been years before when his own daughter was born. Now, there were two more tiny girls, born on the same day, and in the same location, who required his love and care. Peter took a deep breath and felt a shift within himself. The anxiety and doubt that had plagued him began to fade, replaced by a growing confidence. This adoption, these girls, it all seemed like fate. Peter's days became increasingly hectic as he cared for twins. He found himself in a frenzy of diaper changes, feedings, and soothing cries. The tiredness was crushing, yet behind it all, a tiny seed of joy had begun to sprout. One afternoon, as Sandra and Sophie laid on a blanket in the living room, Peter recalled how much his late daughter enjoyed playing with colorful toys. With a knot in his throat, he pulled out a box of her old playthings from the closet. Let's see if you girls like these as much as she did, he added quietly, his voice catching. Peter placed some soft blocks near the twins. Sophie instantly stretched out and grabbed a crimson cube with her small fingers. Sandra, always the more cautious one, looked at her sister, with wide eyes before gingerly touching a yellow brick. As Peter watched them explore, he felt a bittersweet pang in his chest. The sight of the girls playing with his daughter's toys triggered a flood of memories. He closed his eyes briefly, holding back tears. It's okay, he said quietly to himself. It's okay to feel this way. Over the next few days, Peter offered additional activities that his daughter had appreciated. He sung the same lullabies to Sandra and Sophie, read them her favorite bedtime stories, and even took them to the park, where he would push her on the swings. Each shared experience was both terrible and therapeutic. Peter laughed at Sophie's attempts to crawl before crying as he remembered his daughter's first steps. The feelings were intense and frequently contradicting, leaving him feeling raw and exposed. One evening, while rocking the girls to sleep, Peter recognized something had different. He felt a different kind of love for Sandra and Sophie than he had for his daughter, but it was just as strong. It was a love that stemmed from decision, devotion, and the everyday act of caring for these two little lives. "We're going to be fine," he muttered, staring down at their calm faces. "All three of us, we're going to be okay." As the days progressed into weeks, Peter fell into a pattern with Sandra and Sophie. However, the nights remained a difficulty. The twins' cries resonated throughout the home, their small voices full of misery that Peter couldn't seem to calm. One especially difficult night, Peter traversed the nursery, softly bouncing Sophie in his arms as Sandra wailed in her crib. Dark bags under his eyes revealed his tiredness, but his voice remained gentle and patient. "Shh, it's okay," he said softly, caressing calming circles across Sophie's back. "You are safe here. I got you." Despite his reassurances, the babies kept fussing. Their small faces twisted up in misery, and their bodies tightened with worry. Peter's heart wrenched as he realized that the trauma they had experienced in their brief lives was expressing itself in these moments of pain. Throughout the day, Peter discovered other indicators of the twins' unhappy history. Sandra would jump at abrupt noises, her eyes wide with terror. Sophie frequently clung to Peter, refusing to be let go, even for a second. Their behavior was inconsistent, alternating between periods of calm and outbreaks of wailing. Peter felt overwhelmed. There were times when he questioned whether he was actually prepared to meet the emotional requirements of these two vulnerable little children. But then he'd stare into those innocent eyes, and his resolve would grow. "We're all in this together," he'd say, though they were too little to understand. "I promise, I'm not going anywhere." Peter understood that stability and affection were essential. He stuck to routines, giving the twins the steadiness they lacked previously. He read to them, sung to them, and hugged them tightly, determined to show them that they were safe and beloved. Peter's times of solitary meditation increased as he relaxed into the routine of caring for Sandra and Sophie. During nap time, he often found himself staring at the twins' serene expressions, their small chests rising and falling with each breath. In these quiet moments, thoughts of his late daughter, Tasha, would sweep over him like a soothing wave. He remembered her first steps, her chuckles, and how her eyes sparkled while he read her favorite bedtime story. The sadness of her loss persisted, a persistent aching in his heart, but it was accompanied by something new, a developing love for Sandra and Sophie. One afternoon, while Peter sat on the living room floor, assisting the twins with their tummy time, he spotted Sophie reaching for a bright toy. Her determined little face reminded him of Tasha at her age. A knot developed in his throat, but instead of the typical crushing despair, he felt a surge of exhilaration. "That's it, Sophie," he said quietly, his voice full with sorrow. "You can do it, sweetie." As Sophie's little fingers wrapped around the toy, Peter felt a rush of pride. He looked across to Sandra, who was happily munching on a soft book, and his heart overflowed with love for both girls. Peter realized that Sandra and Sophie were more than simply the children he was caring for. They were becoming his daughters. The realization pleased and worried him. Was he ready to open his heart completely again? Could he be the parent the daughters deserved? Peter's thoughts returned to Tasha once more. He worried what she would think about her younger sisters. The image of Tasha as a big sister made him grin bittersweetly. Peter realized that Sandra and Sophie were not replacing Tasha. Rather, they were broadening his capacity to love. As he assisted the twins with their afternoon bottles, Peter said, "I believe I'm getting a second opportunity at being a father, girls. And I swear to make the best of it." As the weeks passed, Peter became increasingly exhausted by the twins' constant nightmares. Night after night, he was startled awake by their horrified cries, his heart breaking for the horror they had experienced in their brief lives. Peter peered at his reflection in the bathroom mirror on a particularly trying morning, following another sleepless night. Dark rings around his eyes, and tiredness weighed heavily on his shoulders. He knew he couldn't keep doing this alone. Peter reached for his phone, shivering, and began searching for nearby parental support groups. He discovered a meeting planned for that evening at a neighboring community center. He took a big breath and decided to attend. Peter felt both anxious and hopeful as he entered the brightly lit room. The circle of chairs was already crowded with parents, their expressions carved with varied degrees of stress and tiredness. Peter sat down, his heart thumping, when a friendly woman motioned to an open seat. "Welcome, everyone," the group leader said. "We're here to support each other through the joys and challenges of parenting. Would anyone like to share today?" Peter paused, his throat thick with emotion. Then he slowly raised his hand. "I'm Peter," he murmured, barely above a whisper. I recently adopted twin girls." As Peter began to speak, the words poured forth like a dam breaking. He told them about Tasha, the daughter he had lost, and how her absence had left a void in his life. He told the narrative of Sandra and Sophie, their terrible history, and the nightmares that haunted their sleep. "I want to help them so badly," Peter murmured, tears welling up in his eyes. "But sometimes I feel like I'm drowning. I don't know if I'm doing enough, or if I'm even the right person to help them heal." Peter thought he had said too much when the room fell silent. Then, one by one, other parents began to express their own challenges and words of encouragement. As Peter told his experience to the support group, he felt a small weight lift off his shoulders. The empathy and compassion he received from the other parents revived his feeling of purpose. He left the conference feeling less alone, with fresh ideas for guiding the twins through their nightmares. Peter put some of the advice he had received into action over the next few days. He devised a relaxing nighttime ritual for Sandra and Sophie, playing soft lullabies and reading calm stories. Their nightmares became less frequent over time. One beautiful afternoon, while sitting on the living room floor with the twins, Peter picked up a soft, colorful rattle and softly shook it. The tinkling sound permeated the air. Sandra's eyes expanded with curiosity, and her little face brightened with a smile. It was little but undeniable. Peter felt his heart skip a beat. "Sandra," he asked softly, "you smiling for me?" Sophie responded with a small giggle, her chubby hands groping for the rattle. Peter felt a rush of joy go over him, tears forming at the corners of his eyes. He shook the rattle again, and both girls burst into laughter, their faces gleaming with pure, innocent joy. Peter took a minute to enjoy the warmth of their laughing, feeling a spark of optimism burn in his chest. This was a breakthrough, indicating that the twins were starting to feel protected and loved in their new environment. But just as soon as the delight had arrived, a familiar ache descended in Peter's heart. He couldn't help but remember Tasha, his late daughter, and the first time she smiled at him. The remembrance was so vivid and valuable that it threatened to overwhelm the current moment. Peter attempted to ignore the notion and concentrate on Sandra and Sophie's delight. But the pain lingered like a shadow. He was divided between the delight of reaching this new milestone with the twins and the ongoing sadness of his loss. Peter halted at the community center's door, his hands tightly holding the double stroller's handles. The sounds of babies babbling and parents conversing filled the air. He took a deep breath to prepare himself for what lied ahead. Peter noticed that everyone's attention was drawn to him as he pushed the stroller into the room. The other parents, largely women, smiled pleasantly, but he could tell they were curious. He was plainly the odd one out, a single parent with twin children. A smiling instructor greeted him with, "Welcome, you must be Peter. We're so glad you and the girls could join us today." Peter nodded and managed a faint smile. "Thanks, we're still getting used to new places." He placed Sandra and Sophie on a colorful playmat, surrounded by other babies and their parents. The twins stared around with wide eyes, apparently stunned by the unfamiliar sights and sounds. As the lesson began, Peter found himself struggling with the activities. He watched the other parents expertly guide their babies through songs and exercises. But he struggled to keep up with Sandra and Sophie. "It's okay, you're doing great," a friendly voice near him replied. Peter looked up and saw a woman smiling encouragingly at him. Just as Peter was ready to speak, something drew his attention. Sophie, the more reticent of the twins, had moved closer to the tiny boy next to her. She put out her small hand and touched the boy's arm. Sophie then laughed heartily, much to Peter's surprise. As Peter watched Sophie connect with the other infant, the room faded away. Her eyes gleamed with excitement, and for a brief time, she like any other cheerful, carefree youngster. Peter felt a lump forming in his throat. Sophie's simple gesture of reaching out and connecting with another child made him feel unexpectedly proud. It was a little step, but it indicated that the twins were starting to trust the world around them. As he looked at Sandra, he noticed she was looking at her sister with interest, a trace of a smile on her face. Peter noticed that both girls were gently but steadily breaking out of their shell. The next day, Peter decided to take Sandra and Sophie to the nearby park. As he pushed the stroller along the meandering road, thoughts of his late daughter filled his mind. He recalled her squeals of excitement as she chased butterflies and her contagious laughter as she swung ever higher. Peter gulped hard and pushed the bittersweet memories away. He was now here to support Sandra and Sophie. They wanted him to be there, to show them the joys of the world they were only beginning to discover. He placed the twins on a soft piece of grass near the playground. Sandra gripped to her blanket, wary of her unknown surroundings. Sophie, on the other hand, appeared to be drawn to the bright leaves scattered around them. "Look, girls," Peter whispered softly, grabbing a beautiful red leaf. He handed it out to them and smiled encouragingly. "Isn't it pretty?" Sophie surprised him by reaching out and grabbing the leaf, curling her small fingers around its edges. She raised it up to her face and examined it with wide-eyed amazement. Suddenly, a little giggle escaped her lips. Peter felt his heart skip a beat. It was the first time he'd heard the twins giggle since he'd brought them home. The sound was like music to his ears, reminiscent of his daughter's laughter, yet uniquely Sophie's. Encouraged, Peter picked additional leaves, forming a tiny pile between the females. Sandra, her interest overriding her earlier reluctance, joined her sister in discovering the new textures and colors. As Peter watched the twins play, he felt a warm sensation creep across his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't had in a long time, a combination of happiness and hope. For a minute, he let himself enjoy the simple pleasure of watching Sandra and Sophie pleased. But then, like a dark cloud over the sun, the grief returned. Peter's smile faltered as he remembered his daughter and all the times like these that he will never have with her again. The happiness he felt while watching Sandra and Sophie play was laced with a deep, agonizing grief. Peter closed his eyes and took a big breath. He wanted to thoroughly enjoy this moment of bliss with the twins. But the weight of his loss kept him back. It was an ongoing war that he wasn't sure he'd ever fully win. A few days later, Peter decided to go to a community potluck at the local church. He was hesitant at first to bring the twins to such a large gathering, but he knew they needed more social engagement, and he could use some adult talk too. As Peter entered the crowded church hall, Sandra and Sophie were comfortably snuggled in their double stroller. He felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see a familiar face. "Peter, is that indeed you?" Mark's eyes widened in surprise before softening with warmth. "It's been too long, my friend." Peter attempted a slight smile. "Hello, Mark. Yes, it has been a while." Mark's attention rested on the twins. "Who are these little angels?" "This is Sandra and Sophie," Peter said, quietly but proudly. I recently adopted them." Mark raised his brow, but his smile widened. "That is amazing, Peter. Truly wonderful." Mark's expression became serious as they looked for a quiet place to talk. "I heard what happened to Tasha. I'm so sorry, Peter. I cannot imagine how difficult that must have been for you." Peter felt a familiar pang in his chest when he heard his daughter's name. He nodded, unable to find the words. Mark leaned closer, his words soft. "You know, I lost my brother a few years ago. It almost broke me, but I want you to know that it does get better. The pain, it does not go away. Nevertheless, it does change. It becomes a part of you, transforming you into someone stronger." Peter listened, his gaze riveted on the twins, who slept soundly in their stroller. Mark went on, "When I adopted my dog, Max, it was like a light came back into my life. He needed me, and in a way, I needed him too. It didn't replace my brother, but it gave me a new purpose, a reason to keep going." Peter felt a lump forming in his throat. Mark's words hit home with him, matching his own conflicting sentiments regarding Sandra and Sophie. "These girls," Mark remarked, looking at the twins, "are not replacing Tasha, but they are giving you the opportunity to love again and recover. It's good to accept that, Peter. It does not dishonor Tasha's memory. If anything, it praises the love you can offer." The following weekend, Peter resolved to tackle the attic. It had been months since he had gone up there, and the room was packed with memories he wasn't ready to confront. But with the twins snoozing blissfully below, he felt compelled to address the past. As he climbed the creaky stairs, dust motes danced in the sunshine that shone through the small window. Peter's gaze rested upon a familiar cardboard box nestled away in the corner. His heart clenched. It was Tasha's. With shaky hands, he drew the box closer and lifted its cover. The aroma of strawberry shampoo, Tasha's favorite, wafted up, and Peter's eyes hurt from unshed tears. He rummaged through the contents, which included a worn teddy bear, a collection of seashells from their previous beach excursion, and a stack of colorful drawings. At the bottom of the box, he noticed a pale blue envelope. Peter's breath caught as he recognized Tasha's sloppy handwriting. It read, "To Daddy." With trembling hands, he opened the letter and began reading. "Dear Daddy, I know I'm only 8 years old, but I wanted to tell you how much I adore you. You're the best father in the entire world. I remember when you taught me to ride my bike, and I was terrified, but you never let go until I was ready. That's what makes you unique, Daddy. You always know when to hold on and when to let go. Every day, you make me feel safe and loved, and I aspire to be as kind and powerful as you when I grow up. I love you to the moon and back, which is a long distance. Your little princess, Tasha." Peter's vision dimmed as tears ran down his cheeks. He clasped the letter to his chest, overcome by feelings of love and despair. Tasha's words lingered in his head, reminding him of their strong link. As Peter sat there, surrounded by Tasha's belongings, he heard a quiet cry from downstairs. Sandra or Sophie had awoken. He examined the letter one more before carefully folding it and placing it in his pocket. Peter descended the attic stairs, his heart full with emotion. He entered the twins' room and saw Sandra awake, her wide brown eyes fixed on him. Sophie stirred a few moments later, swinging her small fists in the air. "Hey there, little ones," Peter whispered quietly, his voice still full of passion. He softly took up Sandra and cradled her close. He said, "Did you have a good nap?" Sandra cuddled into his chest, her small hand grasping his shirt. Peter felt a warmth flow through him, something he hadn't felt in years. He reached down to massage Sophie's cheek, and she gurgled joyfully while reaching for his finger. Over the next 6 weeks, Peter began to notice the twins' individual personalities developing. Sandra was often satisfied to sit silently, her gaze absorbing everything around her. She appeared to detect Peter's mood, cuddling closer when he was upset, and delivering a toothless smile when he was joyful. Sophie, on the other hand, was a bundle of energy. She babbled ceaselessly, her pudgy legs kicking in delight whenever Peter entered the room. She enjoyed exploring, constantly reaching for new toys, or attempting to crawl toward anything that drew her attention. On a sunny afternoon, Peter sat on the living room floor, surrounded by toys and books. Sandra was cuddled up in his lap, her fingers tracing drawings from a storybook. Sophie was close, determinedly attempting to assemble colorful blocks. As Peter observed the girls, he felt a powerful wave of affection that nearly took his breath away. Sandra glanced up at him, her eyes full of trust, while Sophie burst out laughing as her castle of blocks collapsed. Peter allowed himself to indulge in the momentary delight. But then, as it often did, a sense of shame set in. He thought of Tasha and the life they should have had together. Was it inappropriate to be so happy with Sandra and Sophie? Could he ever love them the way he loved Tasha? Peter's eyes welled up with tears as a combination of love and dread washed over him. He hugged Sandra tighter and reached out to touch Sophie's hair, attempting to reconcile his feelings for these two wonderful kids, with the longing in his heart for the daughter he had lost. Peter sat at his desk, sifting through a bundle of papers about the twins' adoption. The afternoon sun shone through the window, throwing a pleasant glow on the scattered documents. As he arranged the files, he came across a familiar name that made his heart skip a beat: Thomas Jackson. "Peter," he said quietly, his fingers tracing the name on the birth certificate. Memories poured back: summer days spent climbing trees, shared fantasies of adventure, and lengthy discussions about the future. Thomas was his best buddy growing up, but they had grown apart after high school. Peter continued to read, his hands trembling. There it was in black and white. Sandra and Sophie's biological parents were Thomas and Jessica Jackson. He fell back in his chair, overcome by the realization. His longtime friend Thomas and Jessica were killed in a vehicle accident 2 months after the twins were born. Peter felt a deep sorrow in his chest, mourning the death of his old friend and the life he had no idea Thomas had led. "Oh, Thomas," Peter mumbled, his voice full of sorrow. "I had no idea." He looked towards the nursery, where the twins were sleeping. Suddenly, their presence in his life took on new significance. These weren't just any orphan children he'd decided to adopt. They were the kids of his boyhood, best friend. Peter's mind was racing with questions. How did he not know about Thomas' children? Why hadn't anyone contacted him? The weight of responsibility fell hard on his shoulders as he realized how deeply he connected with these young ladies. As if on cue, a gentle cry rang out from the nursery. Peter rose up, his legs wobbly, and went to check on the twins. Looking down at their sleeping faces, he noticed traces of Thomas in their featuresque curvature of Sandra's nose and the shape of Sophie's eyes. Peter's eyes filled with tears as he tenderly stroked each girl's cheek. "I'm here," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "Your dad was my best friend, and I promise I'll take care of you both." Peter slumped into the rocking rocker in the nursery, his thoughts racing with fresh information. His thoughts were distant, lost in memories of his childhood chum, Thomas. He closed his eyes and imagined Thomas' easy smile and joyful laughter. How had their lives turned out so differently? Peter felt a sense of remorse flood over him. If only he had kept in touch, he might have been there for Thomas and Jessica when the twins were born. "I'm so sorry, Thomas," Peter said softly, his voice quivering with sorrow. "I should have been there." The weight of duty slammed against Peter's chest. He hadn't just chosen any children to adopt. They were his best friend's daughters. The cosmic twist of fate sent him reeling. How could he possibly live up to the responsibility of raising Thomas' daughters? Fear crept into Peter's heart as he glanced at the sleeping twins. He was already straining to connect with them, dealing with his own sadness and doubts. Now that they knew their connection to Thomas, the pressure was almost unbearable. "What if I am not enough?" Peter mumbled, his hands shaking slightly. "What if I can't provide them the life Thomas envisioned for them?" The immensity of the situation overwhelmed Peter like a tidal wave. He was a single father dealing with his own grief, who was now responsible for raising his late friend's children. The coincidence appeared too tremendous to be chance. But Peter was woefully unprepared for the challenge. As Sophie stirred in her sleep, Peter stretched out to gently massage her back. The simple act of comfort caused a lump in his throat. These girls had already lost so much their parents. Their feeling of security, and now they relied on him. A man who was still trying to put his own life back together. Peter's head was filled with questions and misgivings. How could he possibly serve the roles of both father and link to their past? The duty seemed tremendous. However, he knew he couldn't let Thomas down. He owed it to his friend, and these innocent girls, to be the greatest father he could be. The next day, Peter stood at the cemetery's edge, his heart heavy with loss and a newfound sense of purpose. The rising sun created lengthy shadows across the rows of headstones. As he approached his daughter's final resting place, each step felt like a voyage through time, connecting his history with his unsure present. As Peter neared the familiar granite memorial, his eyes welled up with tears. He knelt down and carefully placed a tiny bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the stone. "Hi, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. "Daddy's here." Peter traced the letters in his daughter's name with shaky fingers. The cool stone under his fingertips grounding him. In this moment of reflection, "I miss you so much," he added, his voice barely audible. "I wish you were here to help me figure this all out." He closed his eyes, allowing thoughts of his daughter to wash over him, or laughing. Her curiosity, the way her eyes would light up as she discovered something new. Peter felt a familiar ache in his chest, but also a flash of hope. "I've got 2 little girls now," Peter remarked, a slight smile forming on his lips. "Sandra, Sophie, they need me just as much as you did. And I am terrified, honey. I'm afraid I won't be enough for them." A soft breeze rustled through the neighboring trees, delivering the lovely aroma of budding flowers. Peter took a deep breath, gaining strength from the serene surroundings. "But I promise you I'll do my best," he said, his voice rising stronger. "These girls deserve a loving home, and I'm going to provide that to them. I know what you want me to do." As Peter sat there, pouring his heart out to his daughter's memories, he noticed a slight shift within himself. The weight of his sadness did not go away, but it appeared to make way for something new. A commitment to honor his daughter's memory by being the father Sandra and Sophie required. "I'll always love you, sweetheart," Peter whispered quietly, rising and wiping off his knees. "And I'm going to adore Sandra and Sophie, too. I promise." After one last look at the monument, Peter turned and walked back into the cemetery. His movements were more steady now, and he felt a renewed feeling of purpose. The journey ahead would be difficult, but he was prepared to face it for the twins, Thomas, and the daughter he would always cherish. Peter returned home with his heart lighter than it had been in years. The visit to his daughter's cemetery gave him a newfound sense of purpose, and he felt ready to accept his role as Sandra and Sophie's father. As he walked through the front door, he could hear the twins' quiet babbling from the living room. Mrs. Johnson, their caretaker, greeted him with a kind grin. "They've been angels today, Mr. Parker," she remarked, gathering her belongings. "I think they're starting to feel more at home." Peter thanked her and approached the females. They sat on a playmat, surrounded by brightly colored toys. Sandra was chewing on a teething ring, while Sophie reached for a plush elephant. He knelt alongside them, his heart overflowing with affection. "Hey, there, little ones," he whispered quietly. "Daddy's home." Sophie glanced up at him, her huge blue eyes full of curiosity. She held out the elephant to him, babbling enthusiastically. Peter grasped it gently and pretended to make it dance for her. Her pleased giggle filled the room, and Sandra even paused chewing to watch. As Peter played with the twins, his thoughts turned to their parents, his old friend Thomas and his wife Jessica. He reflected on the bond he had shared with them, the memories of their youth together, and the unfortunate turn of events that had brought their daughters into his life. One day, he whispered to the daughters, "I'll tell you all about your mom and dad, about how brave and kind they were, and how much they loved you." For the time being, Peter understood that his most important responsibility was to provide Sandra and Sophie with a loving and secure environment. He wanted to provide them with the stability they needed to develop into happy, confident little girls. Peter picked up both twins, one in each arm, and held them close. "We're going to be okay," he whispered to himself, rather than to them. "We're going to be a family." Peter sat on the living room floor, surrounded by boxes containing old memories. He'd finally worked up the nerve to rummage through some of his late wife's stuff. As he combed among the trinkets, his fingers came upon something cool and shiny. Curious, he took out a small silver locket. His breath froze in his throat as he recognized it. The engraved locket he had given his wife on their first anniversary. With shaky hands, he opened it to discover a little snapshot of them on their wedding day. Peter's eyes welled up with tears as he traced the etching with his thumb. "To my love, forever and always." He closed his eyes and recalled the day he gave it to her, the delight on her face and the love that filled their home. He just heard Sandra and Sophie's sweet cooing from their playpen. Peter gazed across to the twins, a bittersweet smile on his face. He rose up, clutching the locket, and made his way toward the girls. "Hey there, little ones," he whispered quietly, crouching alongside them. "I have something special to show you." Sandra and Sophie glanced up at him with big, inquiring eyes. Peter pulled out the locket and let it dangle in front of them. The silver reflected the light, shimmering and drawing their attention. "This belonged to someone very special," Peter said, his voice full of emotion. "Your mom. She would have been like a mother to you, and she would have loved you both so much." As if sensing the gravity of the situation, the twins became silent, their gaze fixated on the necklace and Peter's face. Sophie put out a small hand and softly touched the shining surface. Peter felt a lump forming in his throat. I think she'd want you to have this," he explained, delicately laying the locket between the twins. "Always remember that you're loved, even by those who aren't here with us." As the girls looked at the locket in astonishment, Peter felt a feeling of tranquility flood over him. It seemed as if his wife's love flooded the room, enveloping him and the twins. For the first time since bringing Sandra and Sophie home, he felt completely at ease with his decision. As the days passed into weeks, Peter sensed a subtle alteration in the mood of their home. Sandra and Sophie's once constant cries had faded into laughs and coos. The twins were settling into a routine, and with each passing day, they appeared more comfortable in their new environment. Peter observed, with a mix of delight and surprise as the sisters began to express their own identities. Sandra, the quieter one, would happily play with her stuffed animals, occasionally looking up at Peter with her huge, soulful eyes. Sophie, on the other hand, was full of energy, crawling around the living room and talking joyfully to herself. One lovely afternoon, as Peter sat on the floor with the twins, he noticed something had different. The weight of grief that had been with him for so long seemed lighter. He watched Sophie arrange colorful blocks with her face twisted in concentration, while Sandra nestled against his side, thumb in mouth. "Look at you two," Peter whispered quietly, smile forming on his lips. "You're getting so big." Sophie looked up at him, her eyes flashing with mischief, and purposefully knocked over her tower of blocks. She broke out laughing, and Peter couldn't help but join in. "Oh, you think that's funny, do you?" He chuckled softly, tickling her tummy as Sophie's laughter filled the room. Peter felt a warmth sweep across his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't had in a long time, the simple satisfaction of being a family member. He looked at the mantelpiece, where he had placed the silver locket, which was now flanked by photographs of Sandra and Sophie. The sight of it no longer triggered a searing sense of pain, but rather a bittersweet nostalgia. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Peter said, more to himself than the twins. He recalled those first difficult nightly doubts that tormented him, and the dread that he would never be able to love these daughters as his own. Peter tenderly lowered Sandra and Sophie into their cribs as the sun began to set, giving a comforting warmth through the nursery window. The twins, comfortable and tired from their evening bottle, looked up at him with heavy-lidded eyes. Peter smiled softly and tucked a blanket around each of them. "Time for sleep, little ones," he said quietly, as he stood between the cots. A recollection sparked in his heart. Without thinking, he started humming a familiar Tanith lullaby he used to sing to his daughter every night. The pleasant, calm song filled the silent chamber. Peter's voice, while unsteady at first, grew stronger as he sang the words he thought he'd never say again. "Hush now, my sweetheart. Close your eyes. Let your dreams transport you to starry skies. I'll be here when the morning comes, to greet you with the rising sun." Peter noticed the twins' gaze become heavier as he sang. Sandra's thumb found its way into her mouth, and Sophie grasped her favorite teddy bunny. Peter's throat tightened at the sight of them, who appeared so tranquil and trusting. He repeated the song, his voice gentle and calming. "Sleep tight, my love, don't you fear, for I am always nearby. In your dreams, or when you wake up, my love for you will never end." As the final notes faded, Peter noticed both females had fallen asleep. Their small chests rose and fell in a steady beat, their expressions calm and unconcerned. Standing in the dark light of the nursery, Peter felt a rush of emotion wash over him. He reflected on how far they had all come from those first terrible nights to this time of tranquility. The twins, who were once so frail and fearful, slept comfortably, knowing they were loved and protected. And Peter, who had previously denied his capacity to open his heart again, discovered it was brimming with love for these two wonderful daughters. The grief of his loss would always be with him, but it would no longer eclipse the joy of the moment. He leaned down and gently kissed each of the twins' foreheads. "Good night, my sweet girls," he whispered. "I love you both so much." As Peter silently left the room, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. He understood that in helping Sandra and Sophie heal, he had also found healing for himself. The lullaby, once a bitter reminder of what he had lost, had transformed into a link between his past and present, a sign of love that persisted and grew stronger with each passing day. The following week, Peter prepared the car with everything needed for a day at the lake, including sunscreen, snacks, towels, and a picnic basket. As he buckled Sandra and Sophie into their car seats, he felt a mixture of exhilaration and nostalgia. This lake held so many special memories for his late daughter, and he was going to make new ones with the twins. The short journey was filled with the twins' joyful babble and Peter's kind comments. As they arrived into the parking lot, the glittering blue sea became visible. Peter's heart skipped a beat as he recalled countless summer days spent here with his daughter. "Here we are, girls," Peter whispered softly, unbuckling them. "This is a very special place." He carried the twins to a grassy area near the water's edge and spread out a huge blanket. Sandra and Sophie soon started exploring, their tiny hands reaching out to touch the grass and flowers surrounding them. Peter smiled as he watched them, his heart filling with love. He remembered his daughter's first visit to the lake, how her eyes expanded at the sight of the water, and how she shouted with excitement at the feel of sand between her toes. As the morning progressed, Peter assisted the twins in wading through the shallow waters. They were hesitant at first, holding to his knees, but their dread quickly gave way to excitement. Sophie splashed her hands in the water, grinning as droplets soared into the air. Sandra, more cautious, sat near the water's edge, allowing the soft waves to lap at her feet. Their beautiful, unfettered laughing resonated over the lake. Peter had almost forgotten the sound of genuine happiness and carefreeness among youngsters. Each giggle, squeal of happiness seemed to chip away at the walls of anguish that surrounded his heart. As Peter watched the twins play, he felt a warm sensation run through his chest. It wasn't the bittersweet ache of memories past, but something fresh and bright. Hope was budding like a flower after a long winter. Peter sat in the comfortable office of Dr. Melissa Carter, grief counselor he had begun seeing a few weeks previously. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. Peter fidgeted anxiously, clasping his hands tightly in his lap. "How have you been feeling since our last session, Peter?" Dr. Carter said softly. Peter took a deep breath. "It's been complicated," he acknowledged. "I love Sandra and Sophie. I really do, but sometimes, when I look at them, I feel this overwhelming guilt. Like I'm betraying my daughter's memory somehow." Dr. Carter nodded understandingly. "It's common to feel that way, Peter, but loving the twins doesn't mean you love your daughter any less." Peter's eyes filled up with tears. "I know that in my head, but my heart, it's like there's this constant battle going on inside me." "Let's try something, Doctor," Carter urged. She gave Peter a little heart-shaped pillow. "I want you to imagine this pillow represents your heart. Now, think about your daughter. How much space does she take up in your heart?" Peter held the cushion tightly. "All of it," he muttered. "She fills every corner." Dr. Carter smiled gently. "Now, I want you to think about Sandra and Sophie. Where do they fit?" Peter frowned as he gazed at the pillow. After a minute, his demeanor softened. They don't take up space. It's like my heart just grows bigger to make room for them." "Exactly, Dr. Carter replied. "Love isn't a finite resource, Peter. Your heart has an infinite capacity to love. You're not replacing your daughter, you're adding to your family." As the words set in, Peter felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Tears ran down his cheeks, but for the first time in a long time, they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief and comprehension. "It's okay to love them both, Doctor," Carter said quietly. "Your daughter will always be a part of you, and that love will never diminish. But you also have so much love to give to Sandra and Sophie." Peter nodded, a faint smile appearing through his tears. I think I'm finally starting to understand that," he muttered. "My daughter would have wanted me to be happy, to love again, and these girls, they need that love so much." As the session came to a close, Peter felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. He recognized his heart could hold both his daughter's beloved memories and his increasing affection for the twins. It wasn't about selecting one over the other. It was about accepting all of the love in his life. As the calendar moved to June, Peter stared at the circled date. It was only a week until Sandra and Sophie's first birthday with him. His heart filled with excitement and a hint of regret. He couldn't help but recall the birthdays he'd shared with his own daughter, the pleasure and happiness that filled their home. Peter took a deep breath and shoved the bittersweet recollections aside. This was a new chapter, and he wanted to make it memorable for the twins. He went to the local party store and pushed a cart full of colorful decorations and balloons down the aisles. "Pastel-colored ones," he said to himself, picking up a pack. As Peter shopped, he found himself smiling more. He envisioned the girls' faces lighting up as they saw the decorations, their small hands reaching for the shiny balloons. It warmed his heart in ways he hadn't experienced in years. Back at home, Peter began renovating the living room. He draped streamers from the ceiling, and their delicate colors caught the light. Balloons bobbed gently in each corner, and a banner reading, "Happy First Birthday, Sandra and Sophie," hung over the fireplace. Peter faced his next hurdle in the kitchen, making a birthday cake. He was never much of a baker, but he was determined to make this cake himself. He started with a box mix and a tub of icing. "Okay, girls," he murmured to the twins, who were watching intently from their high chairs. "Let's see if Daddy can do this without burning the house down." To his astonishment and relief, the cake came out quite well. It may not win any baking contests, but it was created with love. As Peter delicately spread the pink icing, he felt a lump in his throat. He remembered his late wife doing the same thing for their daughters' birthdays, using her steady hands to create lovely artwork. "I wish you could be here to see this," he said softly, fighting back tears. But as Peter gazed at Sandra and Sophie, their expressions filled with awe at the transformation of their home, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. This was a new family, new joy, and he appreciated every moment. Peter's home was filled with excitement on the twins' birthday. The doorbell rang, and he opened it to see his best friends and supportive community members walk in, arms full of gifts and warm smiles on their faces. "Oh, Peter," screamed Mrs. Thompson, his elderly neighbor. "The house looks wonderful," she said, patting his arm gently as she entered. Peter felt a surge of thankfulness as he watched the small group gather in his living room. These were the folks who had supported him through the difficult months of adoption and transition. They had provided counsel, listened, and even babysat when he needed a break. Sandra and Sophie, clad in identical pink dresses, sat in their high chairs, their eyes wide with surprise at the chaos. Peter couldn't help but grin at their perplexed looks. "All right, everyone," Peter said, his voice full of enthusiasm. "Let's sing happy birthday to these two special girls." Peter's heart swelled as the group erupted into song. The twins' faces lit up with delight, and their tiny hands clapped along with the music. Sophie let out a giggle that made everyone laugh, and Sandra stared at the candles on the cake with profound excitement. When it was time to blow out the candles, Peter leaned down between the girls. "Make a wish," he said quietly, then carefully extinguished the flames. The room exploded in applause, and Peter felt a tear of delight fall down his cheek. As Peter watched his friends help the twins open their gifts, he realized how far they'd all come. The girls, who had previously grieved all night, were now smiling and playing, surrounded by love. "You've done an amazing job, Peter," exclaimed Mark, his old college mate, patting him on the back. "These girls are lucky to have you." Peter nodded, unable to speak through the lump in his throat. He looked around the room, soaking up the atmosphere of excitement and celebration. This was his family, no, not just Sandra and Sophie, but the entire town that had welcomed them. As he sliced the cake and distributed slices, Peter felt a sense of calm flood over him. The pain for his daughter would always be with him, but it no longer eclipsed the joy he felt in this moment. He had formed a new family, full of love, laughter, and hope for the future. As the birthday party came to an end and the visitors began to leave, Peter found himself standing in the silent living room. Sandra and Sophie had fallen asleep on the playmat, surrounded by new toys and wrapping paper. He looked at their calm expressions, amazed at how much they had grown and changed in just a few months. Peter's gaze shifted to the mantel, where a portrait of his late daughter hung alongside a new photograph of the twins. The sight no longer caused acute pain, but rather bittersweet warmth. He grabbed up both frames and held them side by side. "Look at how far we've come," he said quietly, his voice full with emotion. He remembered how afraid and apprehensive he felt the first time he met Sandra and Sophie at the adoption facility. The road had not been easy. There were nights of non-stop crying, moments of uncertainty, and times when anguish threatened to overcome him. However, there had been laughing, first steps, and small hands reaching for him in the darkness. Peter placed the frames back on the mantel and slid into his favorite armchair. He closed his eyes and recalled the day he learned the twins' connection to his old friend. It felt like a sign at the time, and he was certain of it today. His daughter's death had brought him to these two wonderful girls, who needed him as much as he needed them. Sophie's quiet whimper caused Peter to open his eyes. He watched Sandra, still asleep, stretch out and grab her sister's hand. The little act drove Peter to tears. In that moment, Peter recognized that healing did not imply forgetting. His love for his daughter will always be a part of him, influencing the father he became for Sandra and Sophie. He had discovered a way to remember her memories while also appreciating the joy and love that these two beautiful kids brought into his life. Peter had a deep feeling of calm and purpose as he glanced at the sleeping twins. He had been given a second opportunity at parenthood, and he was determined to make the most of it with a heart full of love for both the daughter he had lost and the girls he had discovered. Peter knew this was where he was supposed to be. Peter gradually fell into a comfortable rhythm with Sandra and Sophie. As toddlers, the twins became increasingly independent and curious about their surroundings. One beautiful afternoon, Peter set up a little table in the living room with crayons and paper. He grinned as he saw Sandra and Sophie toddle over, their eyes sparkling with delight. "Let's draw our family," Peter offered softly, guiding the girls to their seats. Sandra quickly picked a blue crayon, while Sophie opted for a bright yellow one. Peter sat back, amazed, as their tiny hands went across the paper. "Who's that?" Peter inquired, pointing to Sandra's stick figure. "Daddy," Sandra said, smiling up at him. Peter's heart overflowed with love. He glanced to Sophie's drawing, which featured 3 characters holding hands. "And who are these people?" he inquired quietly. "Us," Sophie laughed, pointing to each figure in turn. "Me, Sandra, and Daddy." Peter felt a lump forming in his throat. These 2 small children, who had entered his life through such unexpected circumstances, now saw him as their father, and he realized, with a rush of emotion, that he really felt like their father. As the afternoon light faded, Peter gathered the drawings and helped the twins get ready for bed. He tucked them in like he had done countless times before, but tonight seemed different. He felt a sense of serenity and pleasure as he kissed each female on the forehead. "Good night, my little artists," he said softly, turning on their nightlight. Peter gazed back at Sandra and Sophie from the doorway. Their eyes were already weary from sleep. He reflected on the journey that had brought them together, the loss, the grief, and finally, the love that had healed them all. Peter understood right then that he belonged here. Even at the darkest moments of his life, love had found a way to lead him to these 2 wonderful daughters who needed him just as much as he did. If you enjoyed the story of Peter and the twins, Sandra and Sophie, I've handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.